The venerable Lady Nenneke of the Temple of Melitele in Ellender was as wise as most could only ever aspire to be. She knew a great deal about herbalism and the art of healing, and as such, and in her role as a lady of the temple, she trained young girls to become healers and priestesses themselves one day. Many would also visit her temple in hopes of receiving her aid. Among them, Geralt of Rivia, whom Nenneke had known since he was but a young lad. Nenneke was something of a mother figure to Geralt, even though she was not a fan of his friend, Dandelion, noting that he's Geralt's exact opposite. He would come to her often, not just for severe wounds, but also to simply recover and rest. So too after his fight with the Striga in Temeria, the Striga who had torn his neck to shreds rather horridly. As soon as Geralt arrived in Ellender, Nenneke had removed the painfully thick stitches of shoemaker's twine with which they had sewed him up in Vizima, opened the wound, and dressed it again. Something Geralt wasn't entirely pleased with, as it had only just stopped hurting so much, but Geralt trusted Nenneke completely, and so he let her do what was necessary. What he could not agree to was a trance. Nenneke had asked him to submit to a trance while he visited the temple, to see what lies ahead for the Witcher. Don't pull silly faces, if you please. As I said, your view on religion is known to me. It's never particularly bothered me, and no doubt it won't bother me in the future. I'm not a fanatic. You've a right to believe that we're governed by nature and the force hidden within her. You can think that the gods, including my Melitele, are merely a personification of this power invented for simpletons so they can understand it better. Accept its existence. According to you, that power is blind. But for me, Geralt, faith allows you to expect what my goddess personifies from nature: order, law, goodness, and hope. She wanted to use the trance to attempt to see into the vortex of power surrounding him, as she put it. Geralt didn't believe he was surrounded by any vortex, and if he was, he didn't want to know about it, and so they dropped the subject for the time being. One day, the Knights of the White Rose, Falwick and Taze, came to Nenneke's temple while Geralt was still there. In fact, they had come here specifically because Geralt was still here. Their duke, who they called Prince Hereward, had demanded that Geralt be chased out of the temple. They ordered him to leave immediately. Nenneke did not agree, and after correcting the young lads that their duke was not in fact a prince, but a duke, she told them to stuff it somewhere, in so many words, because Geralt wasn't going anywhere if he didn't want to. In this temple, I give the orders, interrupted Nenneke in a cold, authoritative voice. I usually try to ensure my orders don't conflict too much with Hereward's politics, as far as those politics are logical and understandable. In this case, they are irrational, so I won't treat them any more seriously than they deserve. Geralt, Witcher of Rivia, is my guest. His stay is a pleasure to me, so he will stay in my temple for as long as he wishes.
You have the audacity to contradict the prince, woman!
Taze shouted, then threw his cloak back over his shoulder to reveal his grooved, brass-edged breastplate in all its splendor.
You dare to question our ruler's authority?
Quiet! Nenneke snapped and narrowed her eyes. Lower your voice. Have a care who you speak to like that. When Taze still continued blustering, Nenneke threatened to throw a jar at his feet that may or may not contain a horrible curse. She also emphasized that should any of the soldiers touch any of her priestesses, those same soldiers would be hanging from a tree before dusk. Still, now his companion, Falwick, who really hated witchers, it seemed, urged Nenneke to listen, because the wizards were rebelling and the druids were threatening things. All lies, of course, and Nenneke also informed him that it wasn't Geralt's problem that the local folk were being difficult. When he changes his tactics to more threatening ones, Nenneke tells him to sod off from her temple grounds. Geralt tried to soothe the situation by saying he'd leave in 3 days and he wouldn't ask for more. And you're right not to ask, the priestess spoke before Falwick could react. Did you hear, boys? The Witcher will remain here for 3 days, because that's his fancy, and I, priestess of Great Melitele, will, for those 3 days, be his host, for that is my fancy. Tell that to Hereward. No, not Hereward. Tell that to his wife, the noble Ermelia, adding that if she wants to continue receiving an uninterrupted supply of aphrodisiacs from my pharmacy, she'd better calm her duke down. Let her curb his humours and whims, which look ever more like the symptoms of idiocy. After she had so insulted his prince, Taze started insulting Nenneke, and now it was Geralt's turn to threaten the boy with severe violence, which caused Taze to challenge him to a duel. But Nenneke told them to sod off again. When Geralt eventually made ready to leave, Nenneke asked him to stay a while longer, and when he refused, she guessed rightly that he was afraid of Yennefer finding him here. That was one fear she could assuage, however, as she informed him that Yennefer had already visited 2 months back, and since she and Nenneke argued, she wouldn't be back for a while. Yennefer had come looking for a cure for her infertility, the affliction that all sorceresses deal with. Upon hearing this, Geralt tries to give Nenneke all the money he'd made off the Striga contract. Some of it was meant to be for Yennefer, something Nenneke advises against because he can't buy Yennefer with money, not just because Yennefer was already rich beyond belief. And anyway, Nenneke didn't plan on being a go-between for the two. They talk a while more about Yennefer and witchers and trances, but eventually it's time for Geralt to leave the temple grounds. Except just before the witcher took off, Iola I, a priestess of the temple, touched him and had a prophetic seizure of Geralt's death. Nenneke rushed over to her and urged her to speak. Iola didn't look to be doing so well, and it seemed that Nenneke used a spell to calm her down. A rather powerful one at that, as it made Geralt's medallion tug so hard at his neck that he was forced to bend under the pressure of its invisible weight. But Nenneke had also seen what Iola saw now. The trance Geralt had declined all this time had now happened involuntarily. She had seen Geralt's death and urged him to stay. When he declined, she told him farewell, knowing exactly what his end would look like. Eventually, Geralt would take Ciri to the Temple of Melitele too, to study with Nenneke and her priestesses. When Yennefer arrived to teach Ciri magic, they clashed again, of course. She didn't appreciate it when Yennefer chided Geralt for giving Ciri stimulants, because according to Nenneke, who knew a great deal about herbs, they were natural and absolutely safe. She also warned Yennefer to stop treating Ciri as her rival, to be kind to the girl. And even while Ciri studied under Yennefer, Nenneke would often visit to make sure she wasn't being mistreated. When it was time to leave, their goodbye was tearful. Nenneke gave Ciri a hug, and they were off. But Nenneke would not forget the young girl. When the wild hunt passed over the temple grounds one night, Nenneke, like so many others, dreamt of Ciri. Ciri covered in blood. She even went so far as to enter a trance with Iola I in an attempt to see Ciri's fate. A trance Triss Merigold joined her in. But life went on as it did in the temple, war included. When the temple was called upon to provide healers for the battlefield, Nenneke obliged, sending some of her girls off to war with a heavy but proud heart. And eventually, one of the girls she'd sent off returned to inform her that Iola II would stay away, so she could care for the sick where needed, apologizing on her behalf. But Nenneke wouldn't hear of it. She didn't need to forgive anyone. She was proud of the girl for doing exactly what Nenneke had done for years.
I'm sure you're not surprised, but we're not doing skits at the end cards today either. I am so sorry. My Patreons are getting titles today. I hope you appreciate those too. Walguy the Illustrious, Robertson the Enlightened, Lochmoin the Fierce, MJ Coolsta the Impressive, Septic the Cattist, Mike Zweers the Unrelenting, Adrian Packle the Impeccable, Ray the Fortuitous, Freeman the Wise,